In 1989, the NBA had agreed upon creating 2 new expansion teams. This followed 2 additional expansion teams that were created the year prior. The 2 teams that were to be added in 1989 were the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Orlando Magic. And while expansion teams generally take a while to finally start competing with the rest of the league to develop their talent through the draft and the expansion draft, the Orlando Magic were particularly unique in that just after 3 seasons at the bottom of the Eastern Conference, the Magic hit the jackpot in the NBA lottery by getting the number 1 pick in the 1992 draft. And this was no ordinary draft in which you are awarded the number 1 pick. This was a once-in-a-generation level number 1 pick with one of the most highly touted prospects the game had seen in the big man out of LSU, Shaquille O'Neal. And right away, that changed the trajectory of their franchise. As just 1 season later, the Magic got lucky yet again by snagging the number 1 pick and ending up trading that to draft down to get Penny Hardaway after selecting Chris Webber number 1 overall. And with Penny and Shaq, the Magic in just 2 seasons had made it to the NBA Finals. A mere 6 years after the franchise's inception, they were sitting at the top of the NBA. They ended up getting swept in the finals to the Houston Rockets, but the fact that a small market, newly created expansion franchise was able to make this kind of jump in the league so quickly was unprecedented, and was all because of their ability to hit on selecting a generational talent level player. But things aren't always as easy as they seem, as after 34 seasons in the NBA, the Orlando Magic have yet to win an NBA championship, have only made it back to the finals 1 additional time, and have only made the playoffs 16 times, less than 50% of their total season. So why is it that every time this franchise appears to be on the up and up, their hopes are quickly dashed away in a matter of a couple seasons? And despite the Orlando Magic having a lot of young talent at the present time, there is a reason their future might not be as bright as you think. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy the content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subscribed, as this is a newly created channel, just started a couple weeks ago, and about 68% of you watching are not subscribed. And in return, I'll be putting out NBA related content all season long. Now, as I'm sure a lot of people, mainly Magic fans, will just say that I'm hating on the Magic because, as I'm sure most of you probably know, I am a diehard Bulls fan. I actually started doing content on YouTube through my Bulls channel, Bulls Central. But hear me out on this one, because there is a lot of validity to what I'm about to share. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the video, the Magic were able to secure the biggest draft prize of the decade in Shaquille O'Neal, who was one of the most dominant big men of the 90s and 2000s. But of course, we all know that after Shaq's rookie contract had expired, he became a free agent. The Orlando Magic failed to keep the big man in arguably one of the biggest mistakes in their franchise history. And Shaq left to go play for the most historic franchise in the league, in the LA Lakers, where of course he went on to win 3 titles, and he also added another ring playing with the Miami Heat. Since drafting from their early days, landing guys like Nick Anderson, Dennis Scott, Shaq, and Penny Hardaway, the Magic really hadn't drafted players of note that panned out in a way that they had thought. This includes lottery picks like Michael Dolik and Keon Clark in 1998, or Mike Miller, Kevon Dooling, and Courtney Alexander in 2000, up until 2004, when they landed the number 1 pick yet again, and yet again they had a chance to draft another generational talent, another big man, the high school phenom, the number 1 recruit in 2004, Dwight Howard. And just like Shaq, although I shouldn't say just like Shaq, because I think we can all agree that even Dwight in his prime was a superstar player, he wasn't on Shaq's level in terms of his greatness. But like Shaq, Dwight Howard was able to lead the Orlando Magic back to the NBA Finals, including beating the title favorites of the Cleveland Cavaliers with LeBron James back in 2009. And despite a hard-fought final series, the LA Lakers took home the title, their 4th in the decade. And despite the Magic still being a quality team in the years following that finals run, multiple 50-plus win seasons, the team eventually started to regress, and it was becoming clear Howard's motivation and desire to remain in Orlando was dwindling. And rather than making the same mistake they did last time with Shaq and having him walk in free agency with nothing to show for, the Magic executed a blockbuster trade to send Dwight Howard, you guessed it, to the LA Lakers in the summer of 2012, when he was on an expiring contract and what seemed like a decent haul at the time. For Dwight Howard, they got some draft capital, Jason Richardson, Maurice Harkless, and the young rookie player going into his 2nd year in Nikola Vucevic. But ultimately, despite all the picks they acquired, Vucevic ended up really being the only big win of that trade in exchange for Dwight Howard, in the long term anyway. And then ever since trading Dwight Howard, they really haven't done that well. Granted, Dwight kind of fell off after leaving Orlando, so maybe that worked to their benefit in the long run. But since moving Dwight Howard, the Magic have made the playoffs twice in 11 seasons, both of those times getting eliminated in the first round, and they have had just one winning season in which they went 42-40 since trading Dwight Howard. 7 of those seasons, they weren't even able to win more than 30 games. And now some would say, well, there is value to losing to an extent. You get high draft picks in the hopes of drafting a future superstar like the Magic did with Shaq and Dwight Howard. But even with all of the losing and securing high draft picks, they haven't drafted well. Victor Oladipo drafted 2nd overall. He actually plays well for them, but they get impatient and decide to trade him and Domantas Sabonis, who they drafted 11th in the 2016 draft. They trade both of those guys for Serge Ibaka. Oladipo and Sabonis went on to become all-stars on other teams. They drafted Aaron Gordon 4th overall in the stacked 2014 draft, although it ended up not really being that stacked of a class after all. They eventually traded him at the deadline when they also moved Vucevic and Fournier. They drafted Mario Hezonja 5th overall in 2015. He ends up becoming a bust and is no longer in the league. More recently, they drafted Jonathan Isaac 6th overall, who has been okay, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy and hasn't played for them since 2020. They draft him over guys like Lauri Markkanen, Donovan Mitchell, and Bam Adebayo. Then they draft Mo Bamba 6th overall, and he hasn't really panned out like they thought he would. When he finally had a solid season last year where it looked like he was finally going to start breaking out, they gave him a big extension, and now he's barely in the rotation for the Magic this season, when they likely could have gotten a decent package for him from a sign-in trade as a restricted free agent. Now, over the last 3 drafts, the Magic have drafted well. They take Cole Anthony 15th overall in the 2020 draft, which was actually a pretty big steal to go that late in that draft, an otherwise weak draft class. 2021, they have 2 lottery picks, one of which they get from the Bulls in the Vucevic trade. Jalen Suggs, they take 5th overall. I'm not really that impressed what I've seen from him thus far. Seeing him playing in college, great college player, but always seemed like one of those players whose game just really wouldn't translate well into the NBA, and so far that's been the case. Not very efficient, not a good passer for your starting point guard, commits a lot of turnovers, and isn't a good 3-point shooter. Franz Wagner, though, who they took 8th overall, is where they did well, although I do think Magic fans overrate Wagner and thinking he's going to be a future star in the making. I wouldn't go that far. There are still a lot of holes to his game, not the best outside shooter, not a great defender, for his size, a pretty average rebounder, but again, he's only 21, still a lot of room to grow and develop as a player. And then, of course, the Orlando Magic hit the jackpot again by getting the number 1 overall pick, and they take Paolo Banchero, who so far is looking like the clear favorite to win Rookie of the Year. Only 19, and he's putting up historical numbers for a rookie in his first few games. You'd have to think with Banchero, they have a future star in the making with how dominant he's been early on and being such a highly recruited player out of high school. But in here lies the problem. Why the Magic future, as bright as it seems with all of their young talent, because you can't forget guys like Wendell Carter Jr., Bol, who they just added, has been nice for them, Cole Anthony, Okiki, like they have nice players. But what has happened to the Magic in the past when they have acquired all-star level players? Which, keep in mind, Nikola Vucevic has been the only all-star for the Magic since Dwight Howard. What has happened to those players? Shaq, Dwight Howard, they eventually look for greener pastures in bigger markets, a franchise with a winning culture, a franchise that actually knows how to build around a superstar level player. And honestly, that's what I see happening with a guy like Banchero. A highly touted prospect, a big who can shoot, rebound, pass, a guy who can really be a franchise level player one day. I can see where he spends season after season with the Orlando Magic, not a ton of progress is made. He realizes I'm wasting a good amount of my young prime years in a small market on a losing team, and then starts demanding a trade or looks to leave in free agency. Now the counter argument is, well, with the Orlando Magic, for all intents and purposes, taking this year for a shot at the biggest prospect since LeBron James and Victor Wembanyama, if they land that guy to pair him alongside Paolo Banchero, that's franchise altering. And yes, it would be. You get Wembanyama, you have Banchero, Wagner, not sure what that would actually mean for guys like Wendell Carter Jr. and Mo Bamba when you already have all these bigs, but that's a roster that has enormous potential that you can build around. The problem, though, is even if the Magic finish with the worst record in the league, which is very possible given how they're currently trending, they have a 14% chance at landing Wembanyama. And while I'm sure it's worth taking a 14% chance on to get the biggest draft prize of this generation, what does it say to the rest of the league when you're tanking year after year, having a losing record season after season, and when you finally do land a top-level superstar player, history has shown that eventually they want out of Orlando. That makes it incredibly difficult to attract free agents to help build around your young star players, and it makes it difficult when you have a small market team that doesn't have a history of winning and retaining its players. You have to first establish a winning culture, demonstrate that you can construct a title contending team, and not just hit the reset button every 5 years to trigger another rebuild. That leads to instances of multiple losing seasons, busted draft picks, and unhappy players. And as we have seen over the last decade from the Orlando Magic organization, the future looks bright now, but I'm sure many also felt that way back in the mid-90s and the late 2000s, and we saw how that panned out for them. Let me know what you guys think. Be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.